So in the last video, we covered kind of the first four things in the selection edit tool. Here's our rabbit again, and I'll go ahead and grab his head again and show you. So last time we covered erase and fill, discard, reduce, and remesh. What I want to do in this video is go over extrude, extract, and offset. Extract doesn't have wide use, and even on Mesh Mixer's manual, it says that they may just discontinue it in the future. As I was playing around with it, I did see one maybe use that I thought would be interesting to use it for, and I'll explain that in a little bit. And then offset. So extrude and offset have some similarities, but some important differences. So let's go ahead and get started. Extrude is a pretty common one in dentistry because that's the tool that we use when we are putting a base, at least most people. There's a lot of ways to add a base to a model, but probably one of the first and one of the most common ones is the extrude tool. It works fairly well, but there are some other uses of it. So let's go ahead and play around with extrude. The thing that extrude does, the thing you want to think about, and I left the triangles on so that you can see what's going on, but what extrude does is it takes your selection, which is what I had selected of the rabbit's head. It takes that selection, it disconnects it from the rest of the STL file, like cuts it off, separates it, and then it pulls it away in a direction and then creates a tube of triangles in between. So if I pull this up even higher, you can see that extrude has just pulled the head of that rabbit up, but now there's these triangles in between. And these next two settings are relating to that tube. So obviously the offset distance is this right here. I can drag this up and I can also push it down in, which would cause problems, but I can drag it up. And always with these, whenever you see a number, you can always just come in here and type a number, and you can actually type a larger number than this will let you drag. See, it's letting me only stop at 16. If I want to go further, I can come into here and type 20, and then it goes even higher. So if you notice the triangles right here, there's a certain number of triangles created. Well, let's say you want to change that. That's what the density one does. Notice if I drag this way over to the side, it creates a lot of really small triangles. As we learned about a couple days ago, lots of triangles is unnecessary unless you really need that. Whereas if you drag it the other way, now you have one triangle that stretches the whole span. Essentially, zero density means there's zero like levels or layers. And then you can kind of go 1, and then 2, and then 3, and just kind of split until it gets way too many. So that, the default on that is at 20. I thought, oh, it's not, maybe it is. Let's see. No, for some reason the default doesn't reset, but it's typically it sits at around 20, but you can play around with it. Harden, I've never used harden before, but my understanding from just doing a little research on that, notice right around here, right at the edges, notice what happens is it creates these very small triangles, and I was reading in the manual that was put in place because in the earlier days of Mesh Mixer, that was used for people to do a trick that they wanted to do. Another thing I want to point out is that notice the jaggedness of this tube of triangles. If we instead hit cancel and we go B as in boy on the keyboard to run our smooth boundary tool, and then D for extrude, and we kick this up again, we'll go to 15 this time. Notice how we have a really nice smooth cylinder. Okay, that's a concept where you're going to see later on when we're talking about putting a base on a model and doing it in a clean way. So that's what these tools are. The N type, I'm saving the direction one for last. The N type here is An offset means it's an exact copy of what the selection was. So it cuts it off and it pulls it up and it puts the tube. An offset of flat means it puts a plane right here, and all these different vertices right here, they just go down to that plane. So if I said flat right here, notice what it's done, as you can see even right here where the ears are, is it created a plane like this, and it just pulled all of those vertices down. So if you've ever wondered when you do your, if you have already tried using the extrude tool to add a base to a model and you see this weird shadow, that's why it's there, because it's taking all the vertices and kind of flattening them down into one plane. They don't cause a problem with 3D printing because the 3D printer basically sees it as not there. And so normally I always just kind of plain cut that off because I don't like it, but that's what it's doing, and that's how it creates a flat surface. I'm going to go back to offset, and I'm going to let me show you the preserve group option real quick. So notice that when this is checked, or sorry, when it's unchecked and I hit accept, see what it's done is it created these different face groups. So that's what it does as long as that's unchecked. And normally I leave it unchecked. I'm going to hit undo, undo, and undo, and undo, and undo, and undo, all the way back to here. And what I'm going to do is first get rid of that face group. And no, I don't want to do that. Hold on. I'm going to add a face group that kind of comes right through the center like that. So add a face group. Let's make it a little more noticeable. All right. And then we're going to come back. I want the original. And sorry, sometimes my OCDs take over, and if I want something to look a certain way, I'll get picky about it. All right, so then we go back into the extrude tool. We come back right here, and we go back to 15. And now this time we hit preserve and hit accept and hit clear, and see what we've done, and see how it's preserving the colors that were originally in the model. So that's what that does. Sometimes that's necessary, so you might want it, but all right, so that's all the options minus the direction. The direction is an interesting one because notice this one went in this direction, okay? But if I hit accept and then I redo my select tool and I grab just that ear and I go back to extrude. Oh, hold on, I didn't mean to grab this little piece right here. Let's see. Let's do that again. Extrude. And see, we're still on constant, and notice how it's going in a completely different direction. So my understanding with the constant is that, and this kind of goes back to a concept, I think I mentioned it once before, called normals. So a normal is, and maybe I'll open a drawing program real quick, but a normal is an option. Let's see here. Let's just say new. All right, I'm going to draw something for you here. We're going to draw a triangle. And I want you to imagine that this triangle is three-dimensional, okay? And then if this is a three-dimensional triangle, I want you to then imagine that, let me fill it in with a color. All right, nicer color than that. All right, a little lighter color than that because I'm going to draw something in the middle of it. All right, we've got that triangle there. So what the normal is it is red, this a little thicker. All right, this is going to be the way that I'm going to try to describe a normal. So imagine that you've got this triangle, and we have lots of triangles, but imagine that each of those triangles has this little red line that sits perpendicular to that flat surface of that triangle, okay? And so coming back over into here, each of these triangles, and I know that there are some programs out there that let you visualize the normals, and it makes your model look really hairy because you see all these little perpendicular things hanging off, but I don't remember which ones do. But I've seen it before. But these little triangles right here, every single one of them has a little imaginary line that runs perpendicular. So this triangle here, it goes this way. This one over here goes this way. And what that does is it gives that triangle almost like a direction. And we'll talk about normals in just a second, because another option over here under direction is for extruding it along the normal. But when you're looking at the direction here, what it is doing is it's looking at all of the normals along this whole entire thing, and it averages them out. So the constant is taking an average of all of those different normals, and that's how it's deciding the direction. So obviously if you have a tube like an ear of a bunny, and it has normals going in all different directions, those are kind of going to equal out, but it also has these normals at the top that are sticking out away, and so that is what's pulling it in that direction, okay? Whereas, you know, the head right here, and so if you were to guess, if we grabbed this area right here and we saw an average of all of these different normals, those normals are going to average, like the ones going this way and the ones going this way they're going to cancel each other out. So in the center, where there's ones pulling in this direction, those ones aren't going to be canceled out, and so you're going to see that it's going to go in that direction. So that's what the normal, or sorry, that's what the constant does, is it looks at the normals, okay? I'm going to just, oops. I'm going to delete my bunny. Oops. Or I'm going to make a copy of it. Let's delete these bunnies and bring in a new bunny. We're going to start from scratch here. Come right back, grab that head, and back into the tool. All right. Oh, hold on. I wanted to leave it nice and smooth, and back into the tool, back to 15. All right. So we're right back where we started. And I want to talk more about directions. So the other thing to note is that we have a grid. So see how this bunny is sitting on this grid, and that grid has like an X, Y, Z to it. And if you want to see that, we'll come back to the normal one in a second, but if you do a Y, notice that when you choose the Y direction, it is going in the direction perpendicular to this grid. Okay, and that's just how Mesh Mixer is. Mesh Mixer sees up and down on the grid as the Y rather than the Z, as it is in some programs. If you do X direction, you can see it shot right back this way. So apparently that's the X direction, and it's going into the body, so we can pull it out that way. So you can see that's the X direction. And if you go to the Z direction, it's going to be, so let's pull it out this way. So you can see that it's now going in those. I've never really used much of the X and the Z, but I use the Y all the time, because what I do, as you'll see later on in this course, is I like to align my occlusal plane to the grid, and then I use the Y direction to get my extrusion to be, you know, perfectly straight down, instead of what constant does is constant often will pull out in a different direction. So that's those. The interesting thing about this last one, I'm going to change this to 0 for now, is when you extrude along the normals, remember what we talked about the normals. The normal is this imaginary perpendicular line to that triangle. So if you are going to extrude along those, what's going to happen is that, I'm going to zoom in, this triangle right here is going to extrude outward, exactly like parallel to where it started. and every triangle is going to do the same. So what's going to happen if I do this at 1 millimeter, see how every triangle just moved a millimeter? And if I go to 2 millimeters, notice what's happening is that this bunny's head is getting bigger and bigger and bigger. One thing though that it's hard to appreciate right now just looking at it, but these areas right in here where those ears were, this ear was extruding toward this ear, and this ear is extruding towards this. So the left towards the right towards the left. And those triangles are starting to overlap and create a lot of anatomy in the inside. You can see it right up through here. You can see that there are some triangles ending up on the inside, which is problematic, okay, depending on what you're trying to gain from this. And the more you go, the more messed up the inside of this gets. And I'm going to show you, there's a reason I'm mentioning that. One is because I want to point out that that is not good, and it's going to make future things you try to do very difficult. But two, the offset tool, which we're going to cover later in this video, it gets around that. So let me go back down to 1, so it's a little bit more normal. We're going to hit accept. So you can see that with this one, it basically took the rabbit's head and made it a millimeter larger all the way around. And if you do that by just a little bit, it doesn't often cause problems, but it can. And so there are other ways to deal with that, unless really all you need is one part. Well, no, because even the offset tool, if you need one part bigger like this, still I would recommend the offset tool. So I like using the extrude tool just to put bases on things. And there's some other things that I do, but that's kind of the main reason I use it. So we're going to go ahead and do a little bit of undoing. Here, hit cancel. All right, we're right back to where we started. Next tool that we want to look at is the extract tool. So the interesting thing about the extract tool is it's very similar. I'm going to put a larger number here to get it up higher. It's very similar to the extrude tool, except it doesn't have the tube and it doesn't delete the original. So it's like it makes a copy and then moves it in any of these same directions. Obviously, the normal is going to get all jacked up. I wouldn't recommend using normal in this instance, but you can see the different directions that you can move it in, same as before, okay? So there might be instances where you find value in doing that. I'm going to go back to the constant so that it's out here, and this one I don't get. I don't know why you would necessarily ever want to kind of extrude it into a flat plane like that. But notice that when you hit accept, it creates a copy of those triangles from your original. The only thing, I'm going to head and do, the only thing that I can think of that where this could be useful is sometimes I want to grab a piece of a model, but I don't want to leave a hole behind. Okay, so I want to actually grab a piece of a model and pull it away, but leave the original behind. And so offset can do the same thing. And so that's where you're like, well, would I use offset? Would I use extract? But what I mean by that is if I put this at 0, so it still made that copy and it still left the original intact, and I hit accept, notice that now I just hit T for transform. Now I have this copy that is exactly where it's supposed to be. So I'm going to hit undo. So I can take this one object that I have and I can manipulate it and do stuff with it. I can't say I have any great ideas as to what to do with it. You know, I could take that and I could say extrude from here, and I can say normals, and I can say accept, and you can see that now I have this. It's almost like I have a helmet because the inside has been untouched. But if I took this bunny here and these are connected, hold on. So then if I hid this one, you can see that I've got this little helmet that goes on the rabbit. I mean, there's things that you could play around with, but honestly, I think I even saw on the manual maybe I already said this, that the extract tool might go away, okay? And that's probably why, because there's other ways to do the similar things. All right, so let's go ahead and start over with our bunny. And then the last tool I want to cover today is the offset. And so let's go ahead and grab his head again. And now we've got offset. So these tools are all D, D, D. You got D, Shift D, Control D for the keyboard shortcuts. Offset does a similar thing to so offset always goes along the normals, okay? So the extrude tool, normals was one of 5 options, but the offset is always along the normals. And you'll notice that the calculations take a lot longer. They're pretty intense for offset, because what offset does differently is that as those triangles expand, 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 if anything happens on the inside, it eliminates it and rewrites the triangles. And then also it's like changing them as it gets bigger to be as smoother. So if you notice right here, when we did the other one here, let's do this just so you have a nice comparison. We're going to come in and make a duplicate of our bunny, and we're going to move it off to the side. And on one of these bunnies, we're going to do the extrude, and we're going to do it along the normals, and we're going to do it 3 millimeters, okay? And then let's hit accept, and we'll leave that alone. Then we're going to come to this guy, and we're going to grab his head, and this one we're going to do the offset. So you can see the difference here, okay? And let's check this box. So notice right here, if I hit accept, notice that it creates a shell that's around it, like that helmet idea. But one thing, you know, if you look up, like right here, see how these didn't overlap, but instead they kind of rewrote so that the inside, which you can't see right now, but the inside doesn't have any triangles, which is important for you know, keeping a nice clean mesh. You never want like triangles that are overlapping each other, because think of how this, you know, what this means to you in the real world. The shell of an object creates an object in digital space. And so if you have that shell going into itself, it's not good. It's not good because it can complicate things. Okay, you want to keep things nice and clean. Let me hit back for a second. So that's what I was saying. I was just pointing out that it creates like a copy. Okay, and if you look up in here, everything looks normal. But if you check the box right here that says connected, now it's doing the same thing to what Extrude did over here, where it connects it, and you look up in here, it is including that. So if I hit accept, now you can show the difference between these two. And we hit back. I don't remember what our offset distance was here. Let's make it the same. All right, and then we hit, don't need to worry about that. We hit accept. So technically, these two things here have the same thing going on, but notice the big significant difference is that if you look up inside, see this one's nice and clean on the inside, but this one over here, you see all these triangles from the outside. This is nice and smooth. This one's all over the place, because these ones, the triangles are just going straight up but staying connected. These ones over here, the triangles are being reworked each time. Okay, so let's do a little undo. Let's delete this. Oh, you know what? I'm going to undo a little further. I'm going to hit cancel. I'm going to create this. I'm going to get rid of this guy. All right, let me come back to this. So we're right back where we started. Let's go back into the offset and look at some other things. All right, so that's the distance. I'm going to uncheck this for a second. The distance is how far away from it is. If you want something to go inside the model, then you go in the other direction. Okay, so notice from the outside it looks the same, but what it's doing is it's creating this inner layer that shrinks inward. Sometimes that's what you want. And I have a course on digital DDS that shows how to use Mesh Mixer to make a denture, and that is that's useful. This offset tool is useful when you're taking an impression and wanting to do stuff with it, like create a base plate. And sometimes it makes more sense because when it says the distance, notice that a positive number goes like away from the triangle, and then let me say that differently. Every one of these triangles, notice in Mesh Mixer how by default this is a gray color, but on the inside, and I'm going to turn off my wireframes, on the inside it has this pink striped color. And if you have a selection, sometimes mine doesn't show it, but sometimes if you have it selected on this side to be orange, the inside would be like a black-gray stripe. The side that has the stripes in it, think of this as an article of clothing, like a shirt, okay? And that the gray side is the outside of your clothes, but then the part right here is the inside of your clothes. So every single one of those triangles has a right side and a wrong side to it, okay? And a positive number means it's going from the outside. Negative number means it's going the other way. So hopefully that made sense. Let's turn our wireframe back on so we can see what's happening with these triangles. But the accuracy, notice if we bring the accuracy way down, it is smoothing out more, larger triangles, things like that. Whereas if you kick the accuracy way up, then it's smaller triangles where essentially it's trying to reproduce the shape better. Okay, and I'm gonna, okay, no, that's not checked. The other thing that you can play around with is regularity. So regularity is talking about smoothness. Notice that if we drag that down to 0 and you look at the triangles right now, how there's like small ones and big ones and things like that. And but if you want to start dragging that regularity up, see how the triangles start to normalize a little bit. A soft transition is an interesting one because remember how we had the option to either connect this or not connect it. And that if you do connect it, it's kind of a harsh transition between the two, okay? But let's say that's not connected, but you move the soft transition to anything but, here, we're going to change the accuracy down to here, anything but 0, and you'll see what this does. Let's do like 0.5, okay? See how now it's looking kind of like the connected, but see how you can drag it out, and we'll just kind of click out an increment. See how it's starting to get smoother and smoother and smoother, but also notice that it's changing what it's doing. See, now it's transitioning. So out here, it looks the same as it did before, but here it almost looks like the original. So it's almost getting like more offset as it goes away. And that's pretty far. Let's maybe try like 10. So see right here, it's doing a lot of it, but see how it has a nice smooth transition. And if you look up inside, this is all connected. It's not making a copy anymore. So that's what the soft transition does. I don't ever do that. I always leave that at 0. Honestly, normally I leave the offsets alone with an offset, or sorry, the settings, I leave them on their default. Preserving groups, the same as we showed before. If you have a face group in the original, it'll keep that as it moves to the final. The preserve boundary right here, the checkbox, it does change things along the side. And see how, my opinion so far is that it causes problems, more problems to preserve the boundary rather than letting the software smooth it out. See how it's just a little smoother. Always, 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 to me, I would want to run, oh, hold on. I'm gonna get rid of that face group and come through here and hit that. Okay, so we have a nice smooth, all right, so if I start with something smooth, I can start to expect a little bit better, and preserving the boundary, it's not as bad, but normally I just leave that unchecked as well. Okay, so those are a bunch of settings to deal with offsets. Important takeaway is that an offset is a better way of enlarging something if you need like a part of an object enlarged. Okay, so you need a part of an object enlarged. Offset's a great way to make that separate shell at a specific distance without all the internal stuff getting in the way. If you want the entire object to be offset, I prefer Make Solid to do that, and I'll talk about that when we get to the Make Solid tool. But I hope that I hope all of this is making sense and that you're having a good time.